The sun was setting over New Orleans with a kind of reluctant beauty, casting long shadows through the cracked blinds of apartment 3B. The warm gold light washed over peeling paint, dusty picture frames, and the fading hopes of a woman who had grown used to bending without breaking. Naomi Carter stood in the tiny kitchen, her back pressed against a worn cabinet door, a crumpled envelope trembling in her hand. Her name, written in bold black letters, stared back at her from the top of the eviction notice. The ink bled slightly where her tears had dropped, proof that even strong women sometimes weep. She was 29, a mother, a caregiver, a housekeeper, a waitress, a woman who wore weariness like second skin. And yet through every hardship she'd carried a grace the world didn't deserve. Behind her the sound of crayons scribbling filled the silence. Her daughter Lena, all of 7 and soft around the edges, was sprawled on the floor, coloring a dragonfly with improbable pink wings. Her humming drifted through the room like a lullaby Naomi hadn't had time to sing in months. Mommy Lena looked up, her dark curls haloed in the sunlight, eyes bright and curious. "Are you okay? You look sad." Naomi wiped her face quickly and forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, baby, I'm just tired, that's all. Grown up tired." She folded the notice and slid it into the drawer beneath the sink, as if hiding it there could make it disappear. Lena nodded solemnly, accepting the explanation with the trust only children can offer. "Okay, want me to draw you something happy?" Naomi's throat tightened. "Yes, draw me the happiest thing you can think of." As Lena went back to her paper, Naomi leaned against the counter and let herself breathe for the first time in hours. The city buzzed outside, the far-off rumble of streetcars, the muffled trumpet of a busker on Frenchman Street, laughter drifting up from somewhere below. But inside their apartment, time moved differently, slower, heavier. She moved through the motions of dinner like a sleepwalker, heating leftover rice, scrambling eggs, cutting up a softening apple. She made Lena's plate into a smiley face and poured 2 glasses of tap water into jelly jars because they had run out of clean cups. It was a ritual she had perfected, creating magic from almost nothing. She didn't know how much longer she could do it, but tonight she would. Tomorrow, she didn't know. When Lena went to sleep, wrapped in her favorite dragonfly print blanket, her little fists curled under her cheeks, Naomi sat at the foot of the bed and ran her fingers through the girl's hair. So soft, so alive. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, barely audible. "I'm trying." She got up and tiptoed to the living room, sitting cross-legged on the sagging couch, staring at her phone. Her bank app blinked with a balance so low it felt like an insult. A voicemail from the landlord waited in her inbox unread. She didn't need to listen. She knew what it said. And yet she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet, maybe never. Naomi opened her calendar and mapped out her hours: the morning hotel shift, the afternoon elder care session, the late-night diner. She had a 20-minute window between them all, just enough time to breathe, but not enough to cry. She sighed and leaned her head back. On the coffee table, Lena's drawing sat waiting. A dragonfly with pink wings flying above a sunflower field next to 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. I named the big one, Mommy Lena had written in careful block letters, and the little one, me. We're flying together. Naomi smiled, tears brimming again. She didn't cry often, she didn't have time, but tonight she let herself feel everything. Just as she was about to turn in, her phone buzzed again. Reminder: volunteer shift. Magnolia House Senior Center, 6:30 p.m. tomorrow. She almost canceled it. With everything going on, how could she afford to give time she wasn't being paid for? But then she remembered Miss D's laugh when Naomi braided her hair. Mr. Alvarez's eyes lighting up when she remembered his birthday. The way the residents reached for her hands like she was something sacred. At Magnolia House, she was more than poor or tired or struggling. She was needed, known. So she left the reminder untouched. Somewhere across town, in a high-rise built of steel and silence, a man stared at his own phone. Tomorrow, Magnolia House Foundation, site visit. Graham Whitaker had never believed in fate, but something about this scheduled visit pulled at his chest in a way spreadsheets never had. He didn't know it yet, but his world was about to change with the strength of a woman who refused to collapse. In the stillness of the night, as Naomi finally fell asleep with Lena's hand clutched in hers, A truth hung quietly in the air. She was on the edge of something. Not destruction, but something else. Something unexpected. Someone unexpected. But she didn't know that yet. She only knew the dragonfly had pink wings and that she had to keep flying even if the wind fought her every step. If this story touched you even just a little, leave a word in the comments. Let us know you're out there listening. Like this video if Naomi's strength reminds you of someone you love. And if you'd like to follow her journey, don't forget to subscribe. This story was made for you. Apiyun. The Magnolia House smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish, the kind of clean that spoke of care rather than chemicals. Naomi Carter pushed open the side door just as the chapel bell chimed 6:30. Her shoes were soaked from the afternoon drizzle, and a strand of curls had slipped loose from her ponytail, clinging to her cheek. She didn't stop to fix it. She never did. Inside, the hum of familiar voices welcomed her like an embrace. She passed by the rec room where Mr. Alvarez and Ms. Green argued playfully over a crossword puzzle, then the dining hall where a nurse adjusted trays for the early dinner shift. But Naomi didn't linger. She had a destination, and that destination was always room 204. Ms. D, she called softly, knocking on the half-open door. The elderly woman sat in her recliner, a patchwork shawl draped over her shoulders, a plastic comb resting on her lap. Her fingers, curled with age, twitched eagerly. "Look what the wind blew in." Ms. D smiled, her voice a honeyed rasp. "My Naomi." Naomi knelt beside her without a word, took the comb, and began parting the woman's thinning silver hair with a tenderness that felt like ritual. Her movements were slow, reverent. No rush, no pretense. "This the same braid your mama taught you?" Ms. D asked, eyes closing under Naomi's gentle touch. Naomi nodded, the memory blooming in her chest like a reluctant flower. She called it a blessing crown. "Amen to that," Ms. D murmured. "No one's ever made me feel so tended to." Naomi smiled but said nothing. Words had never been her strongest gift. Presence was. When the braid was done and Miss D had been tucked into her blanket, Naomi moved down the hall. She fetched puzzles for Mr. Kenner, added a touch of peppermint oil to Miss Green's humidifier, and slipped into the community kitchen to prepare evening tea the way she knew everyone liked it. 3 sugars for Mr. Alvarez, 1 with milk for Ms. Green, lemon wedge for Ms. Washington. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew this building like it was her own home. And in some ways it was. Naomi had been volunteering at Magnolia House every Tuesday and Thursday evening for over 2 years. Unpaid, yes. Inconvenient, definitely. But necessary in a way that few things in her life ever had been. Because here, among wheelchairs and knitted shawls, among stories told for the 10th time, and pictures of long-lost grandbabies, she mattered. Not as a waitress, not as a single mother drowning in bills, but as Naomi, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who listened without judgment, the one who gave without asking. And she did it all without fanfare, without selfies, without expectation. Naomi Carter was the kind of woman who filled in every crack she could find quietly, steadily, until others forgot there had even been brokenness there. From the far end of the hallway near the administrative office, a man stood partially hidden behind a lattice of ivy trailing down from the ceiling arch. Graham Whitaker. He hadn't meant to watch her. Truly he hadn't. But the moment he saw Naomi kneeling before Ms. D, smoothing her hands through a stranger's hair, like it was sacred, something inside him shifted. He'd been in this building all of 15 minutes, his scheduled tour delayed by a meeting that ran long. The director, a sprightly woman named Mrs. Elkins, had offered him coffee and disappeared into a back office to retrieve papers. Graham, restless and curious, wandered past the activity room just in time to catch a glimpse of Naomi, wiping down a wheelchair, singing something soft under her breath. She was humming again now, her voice more felt than heard. He didn't recognize the melody, but it had the lilt of old lullabies and worn prayers. "She's special, isn't she?" Graham turned to find Mrs. Elkins beside him, smiling with the warmth of someone who saw straight through people. I didn't mean to intrude," Graham said quickly. "You're not intruding," she waved off. "Everyone falls in love with Naomi a little. Comes with the territory." "How long has she been here?" he asked, unable to take his eyes off the woman, now laughing gently with a resident over spilled sugar cubes. Volunteering for years. Never misses a shift unless her daughter's sick. Mrs. Elkins's voice softened. 3 jobs and still she shows up. Bakes birthday cakes with her own grocery money. That girl's heart is stitched from mercy. Graham felt a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain. He'd spent years surrounded by ambition strategy people with 5-year plans and gold-plated schedules. But this woman, this Naomi, she moved through a room like sunlight, touching everything, changing everything without ever calling attention to herself. He watched her lean down to tie a resident's slipper, her hand brushing against the man's shoulder with practiced ease. Her laugh echoed again low, rich and self-conscious. Single mom, Mrs. Elkins added gently. Been through more than most of us could handle, but she keeps going. I don't think she knows how not to. Graham nodded slowly, something unspoken catching in his throat. He had come to Magnolia House to assess funding potential. Instead, he had found something he hadn't even realized he was searching for. Someone. Later that evening, as Naomi was collecting puzzle boxes and tucking shawls tighter around sleeping shoulders, she passed by the corner Graham had stood in. She paused. For a moment, her brows furrowed, something lingering in the air, a presence she hadn't seen but somehow felt. She brushed it off as exhaustion and headed to the exit. But Graham had already gone retreating before she turned the hallway corner. He sat in his parked car outside the center, hands gripping the wheel hard, pounding with something dangerously close to wonder. That night, he opened his journal for the first time in months. A man known for formulas and logic writing, suddenly with the bewildered heart of a poet. I saw a woman today who gave love like breath, who made strangers feel sacred, who reminded me what it is to belong without asking to. She doesn't know it, but she changed me, and I don't even know her name. Stars shone faintly over New Orleans that night, their light filtered through clouds and city dust. But inside a modest apartment across town, a little girl named Lena dreamed of dragonflies and sunflowers, and her mother, exhausted but at peace, slept beside her. And across the river, in a penthouse filled with silence, a man stared out at the lights below and thought not of profits or presentations, but of the quiet power of a woman who braided silver hair and remembered sugar in every cup. He didn't know what came next, only that he needed to know her. Not because he was lonely, not because she was beautiful, but because she gave without asking, and something in him longed desperately to give back. So, rain glazed the sidewalks of New Orleans in a quiet shimmer, turning the city's edges soft like a watercolor still drying. Graham Whitaker sat in the corner booth of an old cafe off Royal Street, his coat draped over the seat beside him, untouched espresso cooling in front of him. He had stopped here to think, to reset after a long day of board meetings and deadlines. But his thoughts weren't of projections or budgets. They were of her, Naomi. He didn't even know her last name then, not officially, but her name had pressed itself into his memory like something sacred. Naomi with the voice that softened the edges of grief. Naomi who made forgotten people feel remembered. Naomi who gave like her soul had never been broken, even though her eyes told him it had. Graham had seen thousands of faces in his life. Women who smiled too quickly, men who shook hands too tightly. His world had always been full of noise, negotiations, ambition, hunger for more. But she had entered his view like a hush, like a quiet miracle in worn-out sneakers. He hadn't expected her to stay in his thoughts. He hadn't expected her to linger in the folds of his silence. And yet that night he found himself sketching her on the corner of a napkin, not her face, but the shape of her presence, a braid, a pair of warm eyes hands, cupping a teacup. He wasn't used to this kind of ache. It didn't feel like infatuation. It felt like recognition. The next morning, Graham sat in his office at Whitaker House, the headquarters of his nonprofit foundation, reviewing grant proposals and workforce program designs. He tried to focus. The city's needs were urgent. He believed in the mission, but behind every paragraph, every spreadsheet, he saw her. He reached for his phone. "Claire," he said to his assistant when she answered, "can you do a background scan on a volunteer at Magnolia House? Her name's Naomi, works evenings, usually in the senior wing." Discreetly, please. There was a pause, then a knowing chuckle. Of course, Mr. Whitaker. I'll be discreet. But may I just say, it's about time something caught your eye that wasn't made of code or concrete. He smiled despite himself. Thank you, Claire. Later that afternoon, the file arrived. Slim, respectful, just the basics. Naomi Carter, 29. Mother to one daughter, Lena, age 7. 3 part-time jobs. No criminal history. No higher education. Excellent references. Currently behind on rent. He stared at the words, feeling something tight grip his chest. So much strength between those lines. So little recognition from the world. She had been invisible to the systems designed to protect people like her. And still she rose. She gave. She remained soft. Graham ran a hand through his hair. He wanted to help, but not in a way that felt like saving. Naomi didn't need saving. She needed space, dignity, relief, and perhaps just someone to believe in her the way she believed in everyone else. That evening, Naomi returned home from her diner shift, shoes soaked again, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She tucked Lena into bed with a story about a dragonfly who protected a forest, then collapsed on the couch, her body sore, her mind racing. There was a knock at the door. Heart skipping, she opened it cautiously to find no one. Just a small package at her feet. Inside, a pair of waterproof boots, sturdy, her size. No note, just a ribbon tied with care. Naomi blinked, stunned. For a moment, she thought it might be a mistake or, worse, pity. But then she noticed the dragonfly pin attached to the laces, something only someone who had seen Lena's drawings would recognize. Her chest tightened. This wasn't random, but it wasn't invasive either. It felt oddly kind. The gifts continued, never intrusive, always quiet. An envelope arrived at the landlord's office covering the next 3 months of rent paid anonymously. A box of groceries waited on her doorstep every other Saturday. Never extravagant, always thoughtful. At the community center, the copier she always had to fix was suddenly replaced. The heat in her apartment, which had groaned every winter, began to hum evenly after a maintenance man just happened to be in the area. And always tucked somewhere inside the boxes or deliveries was something Lena-related. Crayons and colors Naomi had never even seen. Books about dragonflies and stars. A tiny sunflower pot with a card. For someone who grows joy. Naomi wasn't naive. She knew generosity rarely came without strings. But this didn't feel like strings. It felt like someone was witnessing her life, not trying to interfere with it. Not love bombing, not flaunting. Just noticing. And noticing with care. At Magnolia House, she started catching glimpses of him, Graham. He came often now, though always on official pretext, a foundation review, a check-in on a grant program, a conversation with the director. He never sought her out directly, never hovered. But when their eyes did meet in the hallways, something passed between them. A kind of stillness, like the moment before a storm, not the violent kind, but the kind that changes the air. "Good evening," he said one night, voice low. "Hello," she replied, a little breathless, her fingers tightening on a tea tray. That was it. No flirtation, no comment on her appearance. Just a greeting. But Naomi felt her heart flutter for the first time in what felt like years. One evening after her shift, she stepped outside into the cool night and found a note tucked beneath her windshield wiper. "You remind people that they're not forgotten. I just wanted to remind you the same." There was no signature. But Naomi didn't need one. She looked up toward the quiet city lights, exhaled slowly, and felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Possibility. Not certainty, not promises. Just the gentle suggestion that she wasn't alone anymore. Supermonon. The last of winter's breath lingered in the bones of New Orleans, curling through alleyways and streetcar windows like a secret. Naomi Carter stood on the front steps of her apartment, buttoning Lena's coat and adjusting her tiny wool hat with gentle fingers. Mama Lena said, her voice muffled through the scarf wrapped around her chin. "Do miracles have names?" Naomi paused, surprised by the question. "What do you mean, baby?" Lena tugged on her mitten thoughtfully. "I mean, when something really, really good happens, but you don't know who made it happen, can you still call it a miracle?" Naomi smiled faintly, brushing a curl from her daughter's cheek. "I think those are the best kind," she whispered. The ones that don't ask for attention, they just appear, like the morning sun. Lena nodded, seriously satisfied. Then I think we've been getting a lot of miracles lately. Naomi didn't answer. She only held Lena's hand a little tighter as they made their way to the bus stop. It began in whispers, small, soft changes that Naomi almost missed. The diner started scheduling her for better shifts. A regular customer, usually gruff and impatient, left her a $20 tip with a napkin that read, "Thank you for your kindness." People notice even when they don't say it. At the hotel, an unexpected memo announced paid overtime for housekeeping on weekends. Naomi's manager, a no-nonsense woman named Sheila, winked and said, "Someone must be watching out for you, girl." Then came the coats. First, a box arrived at Magnolia House, 5 new wool coats for residents who never left their rooms in winter. The package bore no sender. Inside, a single note for warmth inside and out. Ms. D cried when Naomi helped her into hers. "It's the first time I've been warm since Harold passed," she whispered. "He always wrapped me up like I was his treasure." Later, Naomi stood in the storage room staring at the empty box, a strange flutter in her chest. It felt too personal to be coincidence, too precise to be random. At home, the miracles became harder to ignore. Her old toaster, which had burned more bread than it ever browned, was quietly replaced by a new one. Same model, but fully functional. A second-hand coffee maker showed up next, followed by a handwritten recipe card tucked beside it. "Sweet cinnamon cafe au lait, just like Mama used to make." Naomi held the card to her chest for a long moment. She hadn't told anyone that her mother used to make that drink on rainy mornings. Humming the same Louis Armstrong tune, Naomi now hummed without thinking. Every few days, something new would arrive. Always useful, always chosen with care. Groceries filled with things Lena loved, but Naomi rarely afforded peanut butter shaped like bear's jelly with real fruit strawberries in December. A gift card appeared under her doormat with a sticky note, "For Lena's next book fair." The handwriting was neat, masculine, but familiar in a way she couldn't place. She held it up to the light, wondering, not afraid, just moved. The miracles didn't demand anything. Didn't knock or call or corner her. They simply arrived like love notes left by the universe. And though Naomi never said it aloud, a name began forming in her mind like a breath she couldn't release. Graham. They hadn't spoken beyond pleasantries since that first night at Magnolia House. But she saw him often, always from a distance, touring the center with the director, speaking with nurses, pausing to listen to a resident's story with a kind of attention that surprised her. He never approached her directly, never inserted himself into her world, and yet somehow he was everywhere, woven into the quiet fabric of her life. She began to look for him without realizing it. A flash of a tailored coat in the hallway, the low timbre of his voice behind a closed door, a shadow moving just out of sight as she turned a corner. One afternoon, as she cleaned up the puzzle table in the activity room, she caught him watching her from the courtyard through the wide glass window. Their eyes met for only a second, but in that second, Naomi felt something profound. Not desire, not pity, recognition. Like he saw her not just her smile or service or strength, but the weariness underneath it. And not as weakness, but as something worthy. That night, Naomi lay in bed with Lena curled beside her, the room silent, except for the hum of the old radiator. She stared at the ceiling, thoughts tangled. She didn't know how to name what was happening to her. This wasn't romance. Not yet. It wasn't dependence. She was no stranger to people offering help, only to demand something in return. But this was different. It was as if someone had taken the time to understand her life from the inside out, and then begun patching the holes she couldn't reach on her own, not to rescue but to honor. Whoever was behind it, whoever had been the hands of these unnamed miracles, was someone who listened deeply, who loved quietly, who understood that grace, when given generously and without expectation, could change everything. The following Sunday, Naomi took Lena to the community garden near Claiborne. They walked past the empty raised beds still waiting for spring and paused beside the rosemary bush that had somehow survived the frost. Lena bent down, picked a sprig, and tucked it behind her mother's ear. "You look like a queen," she said softly. Naomi laughed, pulling her daughter into her arms. "No," she whispered. You're the queen. I just carry the crown. She looked up at the winter sky, gray but full of promise, and something in her heart opened. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the question. Because when miracles came without a name, maybe it meant they came from something bigger than chance. Maybe it meant someone somewhere was holding the pieces of her life with care. And that was enough to keep going. And the skies over New Orleans darkened in the late afternoon, not with dusk, but with warning. Clouds rolled in thick and low heavy with unshed rain, and the air turned cool with the scent of something coming. Naomi Carter stepped out of the health clinic with Lena's small hand in hers, and a plastic bag of prescriptions swinging gently from her wrist. The pediatrician had assured her it was just a seasonal virus, nothing serious, but still Naomi could feel Lena's fingers curling tighter around her own, as the wind picked up tugging at scarves and skirts with greedy hands. The streets had emptied faster than usual. Shops closed their awnings. Cafe chairs were pulled indoors. A soft drizzle began cold and impatient needling into Naomi's coat like tiny pins. The next bus wouldn't come for another 45 minutes, and the shelter near the stop had long since lost its plexiglass cover. She glanced at Lena, who shivered in silence, her nose red, her breath fogging in the wind. Naomi bit the inside of her cheek and tried to smile. Let's count the raindrops, baby. Bet you can't count faster than they fall. Lena gave a weak smile, but it was clear the game wouldn't last. Her little body trembled beneath the layers. Naomi pulled her close and wrapped her arms around her daughter, shielding her from the wind as best she could. She didn't cry. She never did not in front of Lena. But inside her chest, something gave way. That old ache, that familiar bone-deep exhaustion that came when the world reminded her she was still alone. And then from behind them, the sound of tires on wet pavement. A car slowed. Naomi turned sharply, her instincts flaring. Her heart jumped. It was a gray Toyota Camry, older, but well-kept, its window rolling down with a quiet hum. And inside, behind the wheel, framed in the golden interior light, was a man she recognized. Graham. He leaned slightly toward the passenger side window, eyes gentle beneath rain-slicked hair. Do you need a ride? He asked, his voice low and careful. It's not safe to wait in this storm. Naomi blinked, caught between suspicion and relief. She didn't answer at first, just studied him, his hands loose on the steering wheel, the soft worry in his eyes, the absence of pressure in his tone. No expectation, no urgency, just concern. I don't usually accept rides from men I barely know. She said, her voice steady, though her body ached from shivering. I understand, he replied, but I'll wait here until the bus comes if you'd rather not stand in the cold. Lena coughed, then sharp, dry, fragile. Naomi's decision cracked like glass. Okay, she said quietly, just this once. The car was warm, blessedly warm. Naomi helped Lena into the back seat and buckled her in, then slid into the passenger seat with a sigh so heavy it felt like surrender. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped gently on the roof above, and the heater hummed softly, carrying the faint scent of mint and cedar. Naomi's coat steamed faintly at the shoulders. Lena leaned back against the upholstery and closed her eyes. Graham adjusted the rearview mirror and started driving slow and steady. Thank you, Naomi said finally, her voice low. You're welcome, he replied, not turning toward her. Where to? She gave him her cross street and then stared out the window, watching the city blur into streaks of gold and gray. They passed quiet neighborhoods and shuttered storefronts. Jazz from a distant window floated through the fog like a memory. And for the first time in a long while, Naomi allowed herself to rest, not just her body, but her mind. Graham didn't fill the silence with questions. He didn't ask about her job or her daughter or her life. He simply drove, his presence calm, his energy unintrusive. And perhaps it was that quiet restraint that made Naomi speak. She's been coughing for days, she murmured. I didn't want to take time off, but when I saw the fever last night, I just couldn't ignore it anymore. Graham nodded once. You did the right thing. Naomi laughed softly, a tired sound. It doesn't always feel like it. You're doing everything, he said, his voice suddenly firmer. Everything, Naomi. I see it. She turned toward him, surprised. You see it? He glanced at her briefly, his eyes full of something unspoken. Yes. It was just a word, but something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. When they reached her building, Graham pulled up carefully to the curb. Naomi unbuckled slowly, then helped Lena out, cradling her against her side. Graham reached into the back seat, pulled something out, and handed it to Naomi, a folded wool-lined coat. "You left the clinic so fast I didn't get a chance to give this to you," he said gently. "I thought of Lena when I saw it." Naomi took it speechless. "I didn't know it was you," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "It doesn't matter if you did." She stood there for a beat, code in one hand, child in the other, caught in something vast and quiet and terrifyingly kind. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Graham's expression shifted, something deeper passing across his face. Regret, perhaps, or something closer to awe. "Because you remind me of someone I forgot I wanted to be." Naomi swallowed hard, and before she could say anything else, he stepped back into the car and drove away, headlights vanishing into the storm. That night, Naomi tucked Lena into bed with the new coat pulled over her like an extra blanket. She stood by the window long after the girl had fallen asleep, watching the rain etch lines down the glass. In her chest, something stirred. Not hope, she was too cautious for that, but something like it. A whisper, a pull. She didn't know who Graham truly was, not yet, but she had seen his hands steady, his eyes honest, his silence respectful. And maybe, just maybe, the stranger in the storm wasn't a stranger at all. Maybe he was something else, someone unexpected, someone sent by the rain. The sun broke through the clouds the next morning with the hesitant grace of something long forgotten. Light spilled across the floor of Naomi's small apartment, gilding everything it touched: the chipped linoleum, the frayed curtains, Lena's dragonfly drawing still taped to the refrigerator. Naomi stood at the sink, washing dishes, steam curling around her face, her hands moving slowly through warm water. Yet her mind wasn't on the plates. It was still back in the car, still resting in that hour of quiet warmth, where a stranger with kind eyes had held space for her without needing anything in return. Graham. Even thinking his name felt strange. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it had become so suddenly personal. It was no longer just a name on a foundation letterhead or whispered in hallway conversations at Magnolia House. It belonged to him now, the man with the steady voice, the stillness in his presence, the way he looked at her, like she wasn't something to be pitied or admired, but understood. She had met so many men who called themselves generous, men who gave to be seen, offered help to be owed. But Graham had asked for nothing. He hadn't even waited for gratitude. That haunted her in a way that felt less like fear and more like longing. The following Tuesday, Naomi arrived at Magnolia House with Lena in tow. School had closed for a teacher planning day, and Naomi couldn't afford to miss her volunteer shift. Lena, armed with a backpack of books and markers, settled happily at a corner table near the fireplace, watched over by Ms. D and a few other residents who doted on her like she was their own. Naomi moved through her usual rhythm, checking on residents, folding blankets, brushing tangled hair, lifting spirits with soft hands and softer smiles. But beneath the practiced calm, something fluttered. She felt him before she saw him. That quiet hush, the air changing. She turned as if drawn by invisible thread, and there he was. Graham stood at the end of the hallway speaking with the director. He wore a gray sweater today, simple and unassuming, the sleeves pushed back slightly to reveal the watch on his wrist. His hair, always just slightly tousled, caught the afternoon light in a way that softened him, made him seem younger somehow. And then he looked up and saw her. Their eyes met. Neither of them smiled, not right away, but something passed between them. A pause, a recognition, a moment where the world fell away. Naomi inclined her head almost imperceptibly, and he returned the gesture. No wave, no words, just a silent agreement. We see each other, we remember. Later that afternoon, Naomi stood outside near the garden beds with Lena. The little girl crouched down to examine a worm wriggling through damp soil, while Naomi untangled weeds from the thyme bush with practiced fingers. Graham appeared quietly beside them, as if conjured by thought alone. "She's curious," he said, gesturing toward Lena. "She's a scientist in disguise," Naomi replied, not turning to look at him. He chuckled. "She has your calm." Naomi glanced up then. You don't know me well enough to say that. His expression didn't change. No, he agreed, but I'd like to. She studied him for a moment. There was no pressure in his tone, only openness. The kind of man who would leave the door unlocked and wait for you to decide if you wanted to come in. Naomi's voice was quiet. That's not something I can promise. I have a daughter. A life that's... She hesitated. Complicated. I'm not asking for a promise, Graham said. Just a conversation. He paused. A beginning. That evening after Lena was tucked in and the apartment had fallen into its usual hush, Naomi sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, replaying the day's moments like beads on a string. She wasn't used to being approached like that, not with gentleness, not with patience. In her world, attention had always come with weight, expectations, demands. Graham offered none of that. Just his presence, just those eyes, eyes that didn't flinch at exhaustion, eyes that noticed everything and judged nothing. A week passed before she saw him again. She'd just finished braiding Miss D's hair and was carrying a tray of tea back to the kitchen when Graham stepped into the hallway from a side room. This time he didn't wait for her to notice. Naomi, he said gently. She stopped. I'm taking a few residents out next Saturday, he said. A small event in the quarter, music and art. We'll have help, of course, volunteers. Would you and Lena like to come? Naomi blinked. You want us to come? I want you to be part of it, he replied. You already are. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, but only if Lena gets a dragonfly balloon. He grinned, and for the first time she saw it fully, his smile. It was crooked and boyish, the kind that made you want to laugh before he even said anything else. I'll make sure she gets two. The next Saturday dawned bright and windless, the kind of spring day that felt like a held breath, finally exhaled. Graham arrived early in a navy button-down, in jeans with sleeves rolled and a clipboard under his arm. But when he saw Naomi and Lena step out of the van, Lena in her yellow coat, Naomi in a borrowed floral dress, he stopped mid-sentence. Hi, Naomi said, shy but firm. And Graham for once found himself wordless. She looked different under sunlight. Not more beautiful, she'd always been beautiful, but freer somehow. Like something had lifted from her shoulders. Lena ran to him immediately. Mr. Graham, where's my dragonfly? He laughed, knelt down, and handed her a balloon tied to a glittering ribbon. Right here, Your Majesty. Naomi laughed softly, her hand lifting to cover her mouth. Graham stood slowly and looked at her, the humor softening into something deeper. She met his gaze and for the first time didn't look away. And so on that bright Saturday, amid jazz notes and blooming magnolias, Naomi Carter stood beside a man with kind eyes. Not lovers. Not yet. Just two people whose souls had reached out in silence and found something quietly extraordinary in the other. Not a rescue. Not a fairy tale. Just a beginning. Suriname. It began not with a grand announcement, but with a quiet envelope slid beneath her door. Naomi found it early one morning just after dawn when the world was still pale with sleep, and Lena was snuggled deep beneath her comforter. The envelope was cream-colored thick and sealed with a gold-embossed W. She recognized the symbol. It belonged to the Whitaker Foundation. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a letter neatly typed addressed directly to her. Dear Miss Carter, we are pleased to offer you the position of Community Programs Coordinator at Magnolia House, funded in full by the Whitaker Foundation. This part-time role is designed to align with your existing volunteer work and to support your ongoing contributions to the residents you've so lovingly served. The position includes flexible hours, a monthly stipend, and access to a child care allowance. No formal degree is required. Your experience, compassion, and integrity speak louder than any certification. Please let us know if you wish to accept. We hope you will. Warm regards, Claire Reynolds, Executive Director. Naomi sat down slowly on the edge of her couch, the letter shaking in her hands. For a long time she didn't move. She simply stared at it, letting the words settle like soft snowfall. She had applied for jobs before countless times. She had written resumes on borrowed computers, handed out applications to places that never called back, smiled through interviews where they asked her if she could work nights despite being a mother. This was different. This saw her, not just her availability or her background, her. She showed up at Magnolia House the next day with a letter in her purse tucked close to her heart. She hadn't called ahead. Something in her wanted to say the words aloud to speak them into being. Graham was there. He was seated in the courtyard, notebook open on his lap, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked up when he saw her, and something flickered in his expression, anticipation maybe, or the calm knowing of a man who had planted seeds and trusted them to bloom. Naomi sat beside him on the stone bench. "You did this," she said softly, holding out the letter. He read it without touching it, then nodded once, his eyes never leaving hers. "I suggested it, but the decision was Claire's. You earned it." She swallowed hard. "I've never been offered anything like this before. Not without strings." "There are no strings," he said gently. "Just space for you to keep doing what you've already been doing. With support, with dignity." Naomi folded the letter again, slower this time. "I don't know how to trust that." His gaze softened. "Then let it be a beginning, not a bargain." She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "All right," she whispered, "I'll try." The job changed everything, and yet nothing. She still arrived in the mornings with Lena waving from the bus stop, still swept the halls, and helped Ms. D with her morning lotion, still sang softly to residents with trembling hands and fading memories. But now people looked at her differently. Not with pity, not even with gratitude, but with respect. Staff came to her with ideas. Volunteers asked for her guidance. She was given a small office, barely more than a closet, but it had a window, and she placed Lena's dragonfly drawings on the sill. Her days took on a new rhythm, still full, still exhausting, but buoyed now by something she'd lived without for years: stability. Graham never hovered. He appeared now and then, with folders or flowers for the residents, sometimes pausing to chat, sometimes slipping in and out like a breeze. But when he did speak to her, it was with the gentleness of someone who had learned to give space instead of pressure. Their friendship deepened slowly, carefully. They shared coffee in the staff kitchen during quiet hours, talked about music, about childhood, about how both of them had grown up chasing silence, hers in a too-loud household, his in the shadow of a father who never understood softness. "You were born gentle," Naomi told him once, not looking up from her cup. "That's rare in men who build empires." He chuckled. "I didn't build anything. I inherited it." "You could have ruined it then," she replied. "But you chose to make something better. That's gentler still." He didn't respond, but she saw the way his jaw clenched softly, as if her words had struck a place he didn't show to many. But even amidst this unfolding warmth, Naomi kept one truth locked deep inside. The secret. It was one she never spoke aloud. One that sat like a stone in her pocket, too heavy to cast away. Naomi had once loved a man. Not Lena's father. He had vanished before the baby was born. No, this was someone else. Someone she met in her early 20s when she still believed her dreams might have room in the world. He had been kind at first, brilliant, charming, and when he wasn't angry, he made her feel seen. But that love turned quickly. The kindness frayed. The praise became control. The control became fear. Naomi left one night with nothing but her daughter, a week of tips in her purse, and a quiet vow burned into her heart: never again. Never again would she let someone decide who she was. Never again would she confuse attention for devotion. Never again would she give her softness to someone who would crush it. And now, years later, she had found herself drawn to a man who spoke less with words and more with actions. A man who didn't need her, but still chose to show up. Graham frightened her in the most unexpected way, not because he seemed dangerous, but because he seemed safe. And for a woman who had taught herself to live with walls, safety felt like an invitation to dismantle them, brick by brick. Late one night, Naomi sat by Lena's bed, brushing a hand over her forehead as the child slept soundly. In the quiet, she heard the echo of Graham's voice: "Let it be a beginning." She looked down at her daughter and whispered a promise into the dark. "If I step forward, it'll be for both of us." Outside, the city lights pulsed like stars fallen to earth. And across town, in a study filled with quiet books and warm lamplight, Graham sat at his desk, staring at a file folder. Her file. He closed it gently and placed it in the drawer unread. Because he didn't need her past to know her worth. All he needed was the way she looked at the world, with gentleness, still intact even after everything. That was enough. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind with sunlight slanting golden across every surface like melted honey. Naomi Carter stood at the window of her small office at Magnolia House, watching a pair of children race paper boats along the gutters. She sipped lukewarm tea and allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. The quiet didn't last. Claire knocked once and stepped in tablet in hand, her expression warm but focused. Naomi Graham scheduled a walkthrough of the community wing. He asked if you'd accompany him. Naomi blinked. Me. Claire nodded. He said, "There's no one who knows this place like Naomi does." Naomi smiled, a blush rising to her cheeks. "All right, give me 5 minutes." Claire lingered in the doorway. "He respects you, Naomi, not just as a colleague, as a person." Naomi met her eyes. "I'm starting to believe that." They walked the halls in a comfortable rhythm. Graham let her lead, listening intently as she pointed out structural quirks and upcoming events. Occasionally he asked a question, always thoughtful, always brief. When they reached the end of the east wing, he paused near the bulletin board where Lena's dragonfly drawing had been pinned. "She really loves this place," he said quietly. Naomi glanced at him. "She does. She says Magnolia House smells like lemon cookies and kind hearts." He smiled. "She's not wrong." A silence stretched between them, not awkward, but weighted with something unsaid. Naomi turned toward him, a question she'd held in her chest for weeks finally rising to the surface. "Was it you?" Graham's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She took a breath. "The coat, the groceries, the school books, the rent, the coffee maker with the cinnamon recipe. Were those from you?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped, then returned to hers, calm and unflinching. "Yes." The word was simple, unapologetic. No flourish, no dramatics. Just the truth offered like an open palm. Naomi felt her breath hitch. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me," he said. "I didn't want to buy my way into your life. I just wanted to ease the weight if I could." "You did," she whispered. "You did ease it. But Graham, I thought it was a stranger, a miracle." "It wasn't a miracle," he said gently. "It was a man who watched you carry more than anyone should and wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone could carry something for you." Her throat tightened. He continued softly, "I've spent years giving in ways that came with applause. Tax write-offs, awards, speeches. But this, helping you, it felt different. It felt real." Naomi leaned back against the wall, pressing a hand to her chest as if to hold herself together. "It was real. It is real. But Graham, I need you to know I've never been saved. Not by a man, not by anyone. I've been the one pulling my life up inch by inch." "I know," he said. "And I never meant to take that from you." She looked at him, then truly looked and saw not a benefactor or a knight, but a man who had finally learned that love did not demand gratitude. That kindness, when pure, sought no credit. Her voice softened. "You could have told me. I didn't want to change what we were becoming," he admitted. "And I wasn't sure you'd still look at me the same way." Naomi stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You were right." He froze. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, her voice trembling with quiet strength. "I don't look at you the same way." A pause. "I see you more clearly now." They stood in silence, something new threading the space between them. Neither regret nor fear, but a fragile intimacy shaped by truth. Naomi reached into her pocket, pulling out the worn recipe card he'd once sent with the coffee maker. "I've kept this," she said, "because it reminded me of my mother, and because it reminded me that someone out there saw me not as a problem to fix, but as a person worth comforting." He looked down at the card, then back at her. "You are." Another beat passed. "And Lena?" she asked, her voice quieter. "She's had so many promises broken, so many gifts given and taken away. I need to protect her." Graham nodded. "Then let me be patient. Let me earn it, not with gifts, but with presence, with time." Naomi didn't reply with words. Instead, she folded the card carefully and tucked it back into her pocket, as if sealing away the moment for safekeeping. That evening, Naomi stood in her kitchen, stirring a pot of lentil stew while Lena colored at the table. "Mommy," the little girl said, "can I give Mr. Graham a picture next time I see him?" Naomi turned startled. "Why, baby?" "Because I think he's a good man, and good men deserve drawings too." Naomi's eyes shimmered. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, they do." Across the city, Graham sat in his quiet study staring out the window into the darkening sky. He had no illusions. Naomi was not a woman to be won. She was a woman to be earned, with care, with consistency, with the kind of love that never asked to be named. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want anything less. Two. In early spring, when New Orleans began to soften beneath the touch of warm winds and wisteria blooms, Naomi found herself returning to a place she hadn't visited in years, the pedestrian bridge above the river just past the Ninth Ward. It wasn't famous, nor particularly picturesque, but it was quiet, sturdy, and somehow familiar. She used to come here when life felt too heavy, back when Lena was still small enough to sleep curled on her chest, and Naomi was still learning how to keep going without letting her heart break open in public. Now she stood at its center, hands resting on the rusted railing, eyes tracing the slow drift of the Mississippi below. The wind kissed her cheeks and lifted her curls. She breathed it in like memory. Behind her footsteps approached unhurried, steady. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "I didn't expect you to find me," she said softly. "I wasn't looking," Graham replied, his voice gentle. "I was just walking, same as you." She glanced at him, a smile ghosting her lips. "Then maybe we were meant to meet in the middle." He leaned beside her, careful not to close the space between them. His presence warmed the air around her, but he didn't touch. He never touched without asking. Naomi appreciated that more than she could say. They stood in silence, the only sound the soft lap of water below and the occasional creak of the old bridge as it held their weight. "You know," she said finally, "this bridge reminds me of my life. A little rusted, a little forgotten, but somehow still standing." Graham turned toward her, his gaze soft. "I don't think it's rusted. I think it's weathered. There's a difference." She met his eyes. "Weathered." He nodded. "It means it's been tested, and it's proved itself." The words sank deep, not as flattery, not as charm, but as truth delivered with reverence. Naomi looked away, swallowing. "Why do you say things like that? Things that make me feel like I matter in ways I didn't know I needed." "Because you do," he said. "You matter, Naomi. Not because of what you do, not because of how strong you are, but because you're still open after everything. Because you still choose kindness when the world has given you every excuse to turn bitter." She closed her eyes for a moment, the wind catching in her breath. "No one's ever said that to me." "Then the world's been speaking too softly," he said. Later that week, Naomi invited Graham to join her and Lena for a walk through Audubon Park. It was a small thing, a Saturday stroll, casual and unassuming. But for Naomi, it felt monumental. Not because it was a step toward romance, but because it was a step toward trust. Lena skipped ahead, her dragonfly balloon bouncing behind her, while Naomi and Graham followed slowly beneath the oak-lined paths. Spanish moss swayed above them like an old lullaby. "She likes you," Naomi said, watching her daughter dance between patches of sunlight. "I like her too," Graham replied. "She reminds me of you." Naomi gave a soft laugh. "Then she's stronger than I thought." "No," he said, voice quiet. "She's strong because you are." As they reached a wooden bench beneath a blooming crepe myrtle, Naomi sat down and motioned for Graham to join her. "I used to dream of this," she said, looking out over the small lake. "Not the job, not the help, just the feeling of being able to sit beside someone without pretending I wasn't scared." Graham said nothing. He simply turned toward her, his expression open, waiting. "I kept so much hidden for so long," Naomi continued. "Not because I wanted to lie, but because I didn't think anyone would stay if they saw the truth. The struggle, the nights I cried because I had $12 to last the week." He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer comfort too quickly. He just listened. Naomi exhaled. "But you stayed." "Yes," Graham said. "Because you never had to be anything other than exactly who you are." She turned toward him, her eyes wet but steady. "That's what I'm learning, Graham. That I don't have to cross the whole bridge alone. I just have to be willing to meet someone in the middle." That night, Naomi sat in bed, Lena asleep at her side, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. She thought of the old version of herself, the girl who had to claw her way out of bad choices and broken dreams. The woman who had learned to hold herself together with spit and prayer. The mother who chose resilience over rest again and again. And now for the first time, she didn't feel alone on the path forward. She didn't feel rescued either. That would have been too simple, too one-sided. Instead, she felt accompanied. The bridge between her and Graham had not been built in haste. It wasn't lined with roses or illusions. It had been forged in small, steady moments. Honest words, quiet respect, shared silences. And somehow it was holding. Elsewhere in the city, Graham sat in his study once more, Lena's latest drawing propped against a stack of documents on his desk. It was a watercolor of a family, one woman, one child, and a man holding a balloon. He traced the figure with his eyes smiling faintly. He didn't know where this would lead. He didn't need to. All he knew was that every time he looked at Naomi, he felt like he'd found the home he didn't know he'd been searching for. Not because she needed him, but because she chose to let him in. There are moments when life, having unfolded gently for a time, suddenly shudders under the weight of its unspoken history, like wind chimes struck by an unexpected gust. For Naomi Carter, that moment came on a Thursday morning. The day began like any other. Sunlight streamed across her windowsill, warming Lena's cereal bowl and scattering golden dots over the floor. Naomi was packing Lena's backpack with markers and snacks when a sharp knock echoed from the door. 3 knocks. Too firm to be friendly. Too precise to be casual. She stilled. Lena looked up from her coloring book. "Mommy." Naomi's heart fluttered. Something old and buried pressed against her ribs. "Stay here, baby," she said softly. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the door, every step slow, her ears straining. She opened it just a crack enough to see. And there he was. The past personified. Standing on the stoop in yesterday's cologne and a too familiar smirk. Darren. The man she had left behind years ago. Lena's biological father. A name she'd stopped saying aloud. A ghost she thought had no address to return from. "Well, well," he said, his voice slithering through the air. "Didn't think I'd find you so easily." Naomi didn't speak. She didn't move. Every instinct in her body braced as if for impact. Darren leaned against the doorframe, casually arrogant. "You gonna invite me in?" "No," Naomi said, her voice low, firm. "Say what you came to say and leave." His jaw tensed. "I've been thinking about her. The kid. My kid." Naomi's hand gripped the door tighter. "You lost the right to call her that the day you walked away." "I didn't walk," he snapped. "You ran. Took off like a thief in the night. Never gave me a chance." Naomi's laugh was bitter quiet. "You had plenty of chances. You just used them to hurt and control." He stepped forward. "I want to see her." She stepped back just enough to close the door further. "Absolutely not." "I got rights," he said. "You forfeited them when you disappeared without a word," she replied. "We don't need you." "I can make trouble," he warned. She looked him dead in the eye. "So can I. And I'm not scared of you anymore." A silence hung heavy between them. Then Darren's lip curled slightly, something colder, settling into his gaze. "Fine, but you haven't seen the last of me." Naomi closed the door without another word and leaned against it, shaking but not broken. Never again broken. Behind her, Lena called out softly, "Mommy?" Naomi turned and walked to her, kneeling down, hands brushing through her daughter's curls. "Everything's fine, baby. Just an old mistake knocking on the wrong door." That evening, after Lena had fallen asleep with her dragonfly plush tucked beneath her arm, Naomi stood in the kitchen, staring out into the dark, her tea untouched on the counter. She should have told someone, called someone, reported him. But fear wrapped tight around her ribs, not because she felt helpless, but because she felt protective more than ever. He hadn't wanted Lena when it counted. Now he wanted control. But this time Naomi had more than her own grit. She had support, friends, a job, a voice. And maybe she had Graham. The thought made her chest ache in a new way. Could she trust him with this part of her life, the darkest chapter, the most jagged wound? Could she show him the version of her that had been afraid, manipulated, nearly erased? The next morning she found herself at Magnolia House early, too restless to stay home. She busied her hands with linen deliveries and greeted residents with a practiced smile. But the mask slipped when she entered the break room and found Graham leaning against the sink. He looked up. Immediately his gaze sharpened. "Naomi," he said, stepping forward, "something's wrong." She opened her mouth to lie, to deflect, to say it was nothing. But then she looked into those eyes, kind, constant, unafraid. And she whispered, "He came back." Graham didn't ask who. He didn't need to. He listened as she told him everything haltingly at first, then with a slow rush as the floodgates opened. She spoke of Darren, of the years of silence, of the sudden knock, the threats, the fear she'd buried under layers of survival. Graham didn't interrupt. He didn't offer hollow reassurances. When she finished, her voice barely a breath, he said, "You did everything right, and you are not alone." Naomi turned away, tears threatening. "I didn't want you to see this part of me, the messy, scared part. I've always seen it," he said softly. "Not because you showed me, but because it's part of you, and it never made you less. It made you more." She looked at him, then truly looked. There was no pity in his eyes, no judgment. Just presence, just care. And for the first time in years, Naomi let herself lean not into weakness, but into something stronger than solitude. Later, Graham made quiet calls. Legal counsel, security contacts. He didn't ask permission. He simply offered options, resources, a buffer. But more importantly, he made one thing crystal clear. You have choices, and you don't have to walk this path alone. Naomi nodded slowly, her heart still trembling, but steadier now, because she realized something vital. Love isn't just warmth. It isn't just soft words or gentle smiles. Sometimes love is a shield, a calm voice in a storm, a man who stands beside you when the past comes knocking. And Naomi, she was no longer opening the door with fear. She was opening it with fire. Is someone. Sunday mornings had always been sacred for Naomi and Lena. It wasn't about religion or even routine. It was about peace, a few slow hours that belonged only to them. Pancakes in mismatched bowls, music humming low from a dusty speaker, and sunlight curling against the window panes like an old friend. But this morning was different. The laughter came more slowly. The syrup felt too sweet. Naomi caught herself looking toward the door more than once, as if expecting a shadow to reappear. Lena, perceptive as always, noticed. "Mommy," she said between bites, "did I do something wrong?" Naomi blinked. "What, no, baby, of course not. You're quiet. You only get quiet when you're sad." Naomi reached out, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's cheek. "I'm not sad, just thinking, that's all." "About the man from the other day?" Lena asked. Naomi stilled. She had never told Lena who Darren was, not fully. Lena had seen him only once, standing at the edge of the street that morning, looking more like a question than a person. "Why do you ask?" Naomi said gently. "Because he looked at me like he knew me," Lena replied. "But I didn't know him. I didn't like it." Naomi's throat tightened. She reached across the table, took Lena's small hands in hers. "You never have to talk to anyone who makes you uncomfortable. Ever." Lena nodded solemnly. "Okay." And that was that. No long explanations, no confessions, just the quiet agreement between a mother and her child that safety was sacred and love wasn't something you owed, but something you earned. Later that afternoon, Graham arrived to help install a new bookshelf. Naomi had ordered a gift for Lena's growing collection of books and colored sketch pads. He knocked like always, soft, steady, respectful. When Naomi opened the door, he smiled only for her and lifted the box. Delivery for the world's fiercest little reader. Lena appeared from behind her mother's legs like a rabbit peeking from its burrow. "Hi, Mr. Graham," she said shyly. He crouched to her level. "Hi, Miss Lena. I heard your books were getting restless without a proper home." She giggled. "They keep falling over." "Then let's give them a castle." The afternoon unfolded in peaceful, almost cinematic simplicity. Graham and Naomi worked side by side, measuring drilling, brushing away dust, while Lena narrated her latest story in progress from the corner, involving a time-traveling dragonfly in a city made of clouds. When the shelf was finally in place, Lena clapped and threw her arms around Graham's waist. "Thank you." He knelt again, ruffling her curls. "Anytime, kiddo." Naomi stood watching them, arms crossed, her heart both tender and troubled. After Lena disappeared into her room to organize her books, Naomi handed Graham a glass of lemonade and led him to the small balcony. They stood there a while, the city buzzing gently below, jasmine blooming along the railing. "I want to tell her," Naomi said softly. Graham turned. "About him?" She nodded. "Not the details, not the pain, just enough So she knows that love and biology aren't the same thing, that being a father isn't about blood. Graham said nothing at first, just took a slow sip, then set his glass down. You don't have to do it today, he said. But when you do, she'll believe you, because she trusts you more than the world. Naomi leaned her head against the railing, eyes closed. What if she asked why he never stayed? Then tell her the truth, Graham said gently. That he wasn't ready to be the man she needed. That sometimes people leave not because we're unworthy, but because they are unprepared. Naomi swallowed hard. And if she asked who stayed, Graham looked at her then, not with expectation, not with hunger, but with a quiet ache. I hope he said that in time. She'll know it was me. Naomi turned toward him, the breeze brushing through her curls. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, like the soft bloom of something long guarded, she reached out and placed her hand over his. Not for balance, not for gratitude, but for connection. That night, Lena fell asleep with her bookshelf fully stocked and her heart strangely full. Naomi lay beside her, brushing her tiny fingers. Mommy, Lena murmured. Yes, sweetheart. Do I have two dads? Naomi froze. The question came like a pebble skipping across still water, small but deeply stirring. You have one dad, Naomi said gently, and one man who helped make you. But he didn't stay. Lena opened her eyes in the dim light. Is Mr. Graham my dad? Naomi hesitated. He's someone who cares like a dad, she said. And sometimes the people who stay and love us every day, they become family no matter what name we use. Lena thought for a moment. Okay, she whispered. Then I want him to stay. In the quiet of her room, Naomi sat alone by the window. The past had come knocking, but it hadn't torn her down, not this time. She had answered it with clarity, with boundaries, with truth. And in doing so, she had made space for something new, for someone who didn't try to rewrite her story, but simply stood with her in it. The father who left had been a chapter, but the man who stayed, he was becoming a home. Sooner. There are loves that arrive like thunder, loud, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. And then there are loves like Graham's, quiet, constant, the kind that waits just beyond the chaos, patient as breath, the kind Naomi Carter had never known how to receive. And now, just as her heart began to soften in his presence, fear returned, not loud and violent like before, but subtle, insidious. It curled around her ribs in the middle of the night, whispering all the reasons why she should retreat. That morning, Naomi stood at the bathroom mirror brushing out her curls, her reflection caught somewhere between strength and vulnerability. Lena's laughter filtered down the hall like sunlight through blinds. She had everything she'd once only dreamed of, a stable job, a healthy child, a safe home, and the tentative beginning of something that could be called love. So why did she want to run? At Magnolia House, things continued as usual. Naomi organized the weekly activities board, helped Ms. D with her crossword, and checked on the new volunteer program. She smiled when she needed to. She laughed when appropriate. But Graham noticed the difference. He noticed the way she avoided eye contact, the way her smile no longer quite reached her eyes, the way she chose group spaces instead of their usual quiet corners. He didn't press, didn't chase, but his silence held questions. On Friday afternoon, as the last light filtered through the west windows, he found her alone in the garden courtyard, kneeling beside a pot of lavender, her hands buried in soil. Can I sit? He asked gently. She didn't look up. It's your garden. It's ours, he said. You planted half of it. A pause. Then what are you afraid of, Naomi? She froze. Slowly, she stood brushing her palms on her jeans. I don't know how to do this, she confessed. I know how to survive, how to rebuild, how to carry a child through a storm, but I don't know how to trust what doesn't demand anything from me. Graham's voice was low. Love shouldn't demand. But it does, doesn't it? Her voice cracked. It asks for your faith, for your heart, for your hope. And when it leaves, because eventually it always does, it takes all those things with it. He looked at her then, not with hurt, but with sorrow. Not because she doubted him, but because she'd once been made to doubt herself. I'm not trying to take anything from you, he said. I'm just here, offering. Naomi blinked, eyes damp. That's the part I don't know how to hold. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her heart a storm of contradictions. Love had been a danger in her past, wrapped in charm and followed by ruin. Graham was the opposite of that. He didn't push. He didn't pull. He waited. And somehow that terrified her more. Because waiting meant he believed she'd come to him freely, and she wasn't sure she could. The next day, Naomi left a note with Claire at the front desk. She needed time. Just a weekend, she wrote. A short pause. No explanations. She packed a small bag for her, and Lena booked a room at a quiet guest house outside Baton Rouge and left the city before the sun had risen. Lena, as always, was cheerful. Are we going on an adventure? Yes, baby, Naomi replied, her voice soft. Just the two of us. The drive was long but peaceful. The open road gave Naomi space to breathe. She played jazz on the radio and let Lena nap in the back seat. At the guest house surrounded by fields and dragonflies, Naomi felt something unravel. She let herself cry in the shower, let herself laugh too freely when Lena told a joke that made no sense, let herself rest. And that night, long after her daughter had fallen asleep against her side, Naomi stepped out onto the porch barefoot, wrapped in a blanket. She stared up at the stars and whispered into the dark. I'm scared, not of Graham, but of what he made her believe in again, possibility. Meanwhile, back in New Orleans, Graham sat at the long table in the Magnolia House meeting room, Naomi's absence sitting beside him like a shadow. He hadn't expected a declaration, not even a promise. But her sudden distance echoed louder than any words. Claire came in with files, glanced at him and paused. She left for the weekend. He looked up. Did she say why? No, Claire said gently. But I think she's trying to protect something. He nodded. I just wish she knew I'd never ask her to give more than she's ready to. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. She knows, but knowing something and believing it are two different things. On Sunday evening, Naomi and Lena returned. The sky was heavy with twilight, the city buzzing in that soft hum only home could carry. Naomi carried their bag up the stairs, Lena sleeping on her shoulder. When she tucked her daughter in and kissed her forehead, Naomi stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching. Then quietly she opened her phone. One unsent message still sat in her drafts. I needed to remember who I am without fear. Thank you for not chasing me. I think I'm ready to stop running. She hovered, then pressed send. Across town, Graham's phone buzzed beside a half-read book. He picked it up and read the message once. Then again, and slowly a smile broke across his face, not triumphant, but deeply tender. Because he understood. Naomi hadn't run from him. She had run from the echo of every goodbye that had come before him. And now she was walking back on her own. Not because she was asked, but because she chose to. It began with a cough. At first, Naomi thought nothing of it. Children picked things up at school, at the playground, from the wind itself, it seemed. But Lena's cough was persistent, dry, and stubborn. By Tuesday evening, her little girl lay listless on the couch, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy, her dragonfly plush clutched tight to her chest. Naomi knelt beside her, gently pressing the back of her hand to Lena's forehead. Too warm. Baby, she whispered, let's get you to bed. Lena didn't resist, didn't even speak. That was the part that scared Naomi the most. Her daughter, usually a whirlwind of stories and color, had gone quiet. She wrapped her in a blanket and held her close as they sat in the clinic waiting room. The lights were too bright. The walls smelled faintly of antiseptic and fatigue. Naomi stroked Lena's back, whispering lullabies only half remembered from her own childhood. When the nurse called her name, Naomi stood with Lena in her arms, strong but shaking inside. The pediatrician was kind, calm, thorough. He listened to Lena's breathing, asked Naomi questions in that slow, measured tone doctors use to keep panic at bay. He sent them for tests just to rule out pneumonia. Naomi nodded at everything, took notes, asked the right questions. But inside she unraveled. By the time they returned home, the apartment felt unfamiliar, like a stage emptied of its actors. Naomi tucked Lena into bed and sat beside her, holding a damp cloth to her brow. She didn't cry, not yet, but the fear gathered in her throat like storm clouds. Graham arrived later that evening. He didn't knock loudly, didn't ask if he should come in. He simply texted, I'm downstairs if you need me. Naomi read the message 3 times before responding, doors open. He stepped in quietly, carrying a thermos of soup and a new pack of colored pencils. She's asleep, Naomi whispered, finally. Graham set the thermos down and crossed the room slow and respectful, as if even the air had grown sacred. "She okay?" he asked gently. Naomi shook her head. "I don't know yet. We're waiting on results. The doctor said to watch her. Hydrate. Rest." She turned toward him, eyes red but dry. "I'm scared, Graham." He didn't offer platitudes. He just opened his arms, and this time she didn't hesitate. She stepped into them like stepping into shelter. They sat together in the dim-lit living room, Naomi curled into his side, silence stretching between them like a shared heartbeat. She didn't speak for a long time, just breathed him in. Graham's presence was steady grounding, like the deep roots of an old tree. Finally, she murmured, "I've always known what to do when I was the one hurting. But when it's her," Graham kissed the crown of her head, "then you do exactly what you're doing. You hold her. You stay close. And you let someone hold you too." Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. "What if it's something serious? Then we face it," he said softly, "together." At 2 a.m., Lena stirred with a whimper. Naomi rushed to her side, Graham following quietly behind. Lena's fever had crept higher, her breathing shallow. Naomi gathered her daughter into her arms, rocking her gently, whispering promises she couldn't fully voice. Graham knelt beside them and placed a cool cloth against Lena's forehead. His movements were careful, reverent. "I used to get fevers like this when I was little," he said softly. "My mother would hum old folk songs until I slept." Naomi gave a faint smile through her worry. "What kind of songs?" "Ones about rivers and birds that always came home." He began to hum low and steady, the melody unfamiliar but soothing. Lena quieted. Naomi didn't say anything, but her eyes shimmered. The test results came back the next morning. It wasn't pneumonia, just a viral infection. Exhausting but manageable. A few days of rest and careful care would see Lena through. Naomi nearly collapsed with relief. She called Graham, her voice trembling. "She's okay, just tired, like me." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said, and she could hear the exhale of his own relief. When he arrived, he didn't bring flowers or gifts. He brought groceries, soft socks, and a thermos refilled with soup. And later that night, after Naomi had fallen asleep beside Lena's bed, Graham sat silently in the living room, watching the shadows dance across the walls, listening to the hush of a household that had weathered something terrifying and come through whole. When Naomi woke, she found a note tucked beside her phone. "You are the fiercest person I know, but even warriors need rest. I'll be here always, just outside the fight, in case you ever want to lay down your sword." Gee, she clutched the note to her chest. And finally she let herself cry, not from fear, but from release. From the overwhelming truth that when love is real, it doesn't wait for perfect timing or polished hearts. It arrives, it stays. It sings lullabies to sick children and brings soup to exhausted mothers. And it never ever leaves when the fever breaks. By the time April arrived, the last of winter's bite had softened, and the days stretched longer, golden and kind. Naomi Carter found herself waking earlier, drawn from sleep not by anxiety or obligation, but by something gentler, a growing quiet inside her chest, like the space love makes when it no longer demands permission to stay. Lena had recovered fully, her laughter once again a constant melody in their home. But something had changed, not just in the child, but in Naomi herself. She no longer feared joy the way she used to. It didn't feel like a trick anymore. It felt like something earned. One Sunday morning, Naomi, Lena, and Graham drove out to the bayou, a short trip, no agenda, just a promise of cypress trees, dragonflies, and silence deeper than the city could offer. Lena sat in the back seat with a sketch pad on her knees, humming as she drew a river lined with willows and a dragonfly with stars in its wings. Naomi glanced at her through the mirror, then at Graham, who drove one-handed, his gaze steady on the winding road, his other hand resting open on the console between them. She reached across and placed her hand in his. He didn't flinch, just laced their fingers together and kept driving. The trail through the wetlands was soft beneath their shoes. Lena ran ahead on the boardwalk, her curls bouncing, her laughter scattering like dandelion fluff into the wind. Naomi and Graham walked behind her slowly, their hands still intertwined. She spoke first. "There's something I've never said to you," she began, her voice low. Graham turned slightly. "You don't have to. I want to." They stopped beneath a wide cypress tree, its limbs stretched like open arms, moss swaying gently like forgotten lullabies. Naomi took a breath. I used to believe love always left, that it faded, fell apart, or found an exit the moment things got hard. Graham didn't interrupt. He let her speak her truth. But you stayed, she whispered. When Lena got sick, when I ran, when I doubted myself, you stayed not because you needed something from me, but because that's who you are. He studied her, his eyes not soft but clear, unshakable. Naomi, he said, I never stayed because I was trying to fix anything. I stayed because loving you is the most natural thing I've ever done. And if I have to stand quietly beside you until you're ready to lean, I'll do that for as long as it takes. A tear slid down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from something deeper. Recognition. Relief. She laughed softly, wiping it away. You sound like poetry. He smiled. Only because you make me feel like a verse worth writing. Later, they picnicked on a small wooden deck overlooking the water. Lena fed crumbs to the fish below, while Naomi laid her head in Graham's lap, watching clouds pass through the cypress canopy. Did you ever think, she murmured, that your life would lead here to this? He stroked her curls gently. I thought my life would be about building things. Companies, wealth, legacy. But none of that ever felt real. Not like this. She tilted her head, gazing up at him. And now I want to build something that lasts. With you, with Lena. A hush settled between them, full of meaning. Then Lena called out from the water's edge. Mommy, Mr. Graham, look, two turtles. They're sitting like they're best friends. Naomi sat up laughing. Maybe they are. Maybe they're in love, Lena offered matter of fact. Graham smiled at Naomi. Out of the mouths of babes. On the drive home, Lena fell asleep in the back seat, her sketch pad resting open on her chest. Naomi reached back and adjusted the blanket over her, then leaned her head against the window, watching the trees blur into memory. Graham, she said softly, can I ask you something? Anything. Why me? Why stay when there are simpler paths, safer ones? He didn't hesitate. Because you taught me something no one else ever could, that strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means breaking and still choosing to love anyway. She turned toward him, eyes wide, with something more than wonder, something like knowing. I think I love you, she said, voice almost shy. He glanced over, took her hand in his again. I know, he whispered. And I've loved you for a long time. That night in the quiet of their apartment, Naomi tucked Lena into bed. She lingered, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. Mommy. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Mr. Graham will stay for all the weekends? Naomi smiled. Why do you ask? Because when he's here, the apartment feels bigger, like it can hold more love. Naomi bent down and kissed her cheek. I think he already has. In the living room, Graham waited with a cup of tea. Naomi joined him on the couch, their knees touching the air, full of warmth and possibility. She leaned her head on his shoulder and sighed. I'm not used to this, she admitted. What tabersfuen? This kind of love. The kind that doesn't leave. He wrapped his arm around her, steady as the tides. Then let's get used to it, together. And beneath the quiet hum of the night, with the city lights shimmering beyond the window, Naomi allowed herself to believe that love could last. That home wasn't a place, it was a person, and that this time it wouldn't disappear. It would stay. Once her dead. The wedding wasn't grand. There were no glittering chandeliers, no velvet aisle runners, no fanfare. It took place beneath the branches of a cypress tree in the park, where Naomi and Graham had once found stillness, where Lena had first seen love mirrored in turtles sunning on the dock. Naomi wore ivory, soft and simple, the kind of dress that moved with her rather than announcing her. Her curls were pinned loosely, jasmine tucked behind one ear. Graham stood beside her in a linen suit, his hair tousled by the wind, eyes never straying from hers. Lena was the one who led the way, a crown of wildflowers in her hair, carrying a small notebook in her hands, the one she called her Book of Big Feelings. She had drawn hearts, trees, and one stick figure family that made Naomi tear up when she saw it days before. A tall man, a woman with curls, and a little girl with a dragonfly above her head. Are you nervous? Naomi whispered, just moments before the officiant began. Graham shook his head, his hand warm in hers. Not even a little. I've been walking toward this moment since the day I saw you reading to Lena, under that broken Magnolia House ceiling. Naomi smiled through the blur in her eyes. Then let's make it home. The vows were not read from paper. They were spoken from memory, from heartbeats. I promise, Graham said, to love the strength in you and to hold you gently when the world feels heavy. To raise Lena with joy, with patience, with the same grace you've shown me. And to build a life that never asks you to be anything but exactly who you are. Naomi's voice shook, but she did not falter. I promise to let love stay, to let it grow without fear, to believe in second chances, in new beginnings, and in the quiet man who showed me that family isn't given, it's chosen. They kissed beneath the wide limbs of the cypress tree, and the wind stirred around them like a blessing whispered by the earth itself. In the weeks that followed, life resumed, but differently. It wasn't about dramatic change, but about soft constancy. Naomi returned to Magnolia House now as director. Claire stepped into a higher role too, with a grin that said she'd always known Naomi would rise. Lena started second grade and came home each day with new facts about galaxies and butterflies, asking questions like, can love be seen under a microscope? To which Graham always replied, only if the lens is made of magic. And on evenings when the world felt too loud, the three of them would retreat to their little balcony, stars above and stories below, and the kind of peace that only comes when no one is pretending anymore. One evening, long after Lena had fallen asleep beneath a sky of glow-in-the-dark stars, Naomi and Graham sat curled up on the couch, a soft record humming in the background. You ever think, Naomi murmured, about how easily we could have missed this? If I hadn't taken that job, if you hadn't walked in with your quiet eyes and your stubborn kindness. Graham looked down at her, brushing a thumb along her jaw. I don't think we ever would have missed each other. Even if it wasn't then, it would have been another time, another place. Because you're not just the love of my life, Naomi. You are my life. Tears welled in her eyes, unashamed. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She didn't brace for disappointment. She simply leaned in, fully, freely. Because this was not the kind of love that demanded or rescued. This was the kind of love that remained. On their first anniversary, Lena presented them with a card that read in large block letters, "You are my forever family." Naomi pressed it to her heart. Graham lifted Lena into his arms and spun her around until her giggles echoed through every room of their home. Their life wasn't flawless. There were long work days, math homework battles, and the occasional argument about where to put the laundry basket. But it was theirs, rooted not in perfection but in presence. And above all, in the unshakable truth that love, when chosen daily, when nurtured not with grand gestures but with quiet loyalty, becomes the very ground on which joy can bloom. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe in healing after heartbreak and second chances, and in the kind of love that shows up quietly and stays fiercely, then don't keep it to yourself. Like this story, leave a comment and follow our channel for more tales of love that overcomes, that endures, and that reminds us we're never too broken to be whole again. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to know that love doesn't always leave. Sometime it finds you, and it stays.